everyone. My name is Elsie Phillips, and as previously mentioned, I work at CoreOS. I'm very excited to be helping to kick off the open source portion of this conference. Open source is really near and dear to my heart. My first job in tech was at the OSU Open Source Lab. Through that position, I gained an appreciation for open source culture and also became inspired to learn how to program. Through that experience, I committed to trying to work only for companies that valued open source as much as I did. I currently work at CoreOS, which is pioneering a different way of monetizing open source. The venture capitalist Peter Levine famously once said that there would never be another Red Hat. This is maybe because they hold kind of a unique position in the market. Today, I'm going to make the argument that there maybe doesn't have to be. There are many different business models available for companies who want to monetize open source. Sorry, can we go back a slide? Perfect. OK. First, let's go into some of the history between enterprises and open source. Throughout the 90s and early aughts, there was this perception that open source and enterprise software were mutually exclusive, and it was locked in a savage zero-sum game. Microsoft became the poster child of the anti-open source contingent. This is an excerpt from the infamous Halloween memos written by then Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer. Linux is not in the public domain. Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. The open source community, and especially Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, wasn't shy about clapping back. He famously once said, "If Microsoft ever does an application for Linux, it means that I've won." Now let's fast forward 15 or so years. The Holy War is over. And I actually think that we can say that open source is pretty solidly won. Microsoft has begun joining prominent open source organizations, such as the Linux Foundation, and important to me, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation is the organization that the Kubernetes project sits under, and I'm a contributor to that. They employ high-profile members of that community, such as Brendan Burns, one of the original creators, and prominent contributors such as Jess Frizzell. We have truly seen a revolution when it comes to corporate thinking around open source, and I think Microsoft is a really awesome example of that. So why the 180? We can maybe potentially think of a few reasons why. But before we talk about how awesome open source is, I think it's fair to also talk about some of the misconceptions around it. The first myth that we're going to talk about is that open source is free, as in beer. It won't cost you anything to use open source. Now, someone might think that this might be a good strategy to lure people into trying their products. Think Costco samples. People come for the free stuff, and then maybe they'll buy some stuff too. Open source is not free on many levels. As this quote says, Linux is only free if you don't value your time. All software development, like any other business decision, is littered with opportunity cost, or the cost of the next best alternative. If it's your open source project that non-employees are contributing to, you still have to review and maintain that code, which takes your developers' time away from writing new code. If it's a project that you're looking to use, you still need to invest a lot of time in learning how it works and maintaining it. OK, so your company has decided to take on the cost of developing some open source software. But you might rationalize that at least you'll be getting help from the community in building and maintaining it. Open source is easier to build than closed source because there are more people contributing to it, right? We're going to look at this next myth through the context of GNU Herd, which is a large FLOSS project started by Richard Stallman in the pre-Linux, post-Unix era. In his manifesto for the project, Stallman writes, "Once GNU is written, everyone will be able to obtain good system software free, just like air." Despite development starting before Linux, it has yet to be completed more than 30 years later. So just because a project is being worked on in the open does not mean that it will enjoy rapid development velocity. Diseconomies of scale apply to large open source development efforts. Coordinating with more people actually makes work more difficult after a point and decreases marginal productivity. There's this belief that open source will inherently be easier and faster. In reality, it's a big challenge to coordinate, and if you do so poorly, people will get angry. There's this really, I think, telling quote that floats around the community that you should always code as if the person who ends up maintaining your code will be a violent sociopath who knows where you live, or at least knows your Twitter handle. The final myth that we're going to examine is that companies devote resources to open source projects because they're trying to gain notoriety for being a good company in the industry. They're going for that good citizen badge. In reality, there are many other incentives for companies to contribute to open source. One of the primary ones revolves around something that you learned about probably in an economics class: complementarities. Despite being a foodie, my favorite all-time food is cereal. So when my favorite cereal goes on sale, I stock up 6 or 7 boxes generally. It's a little bit embarrassing. But while I am filling my cart with cereal, I also have to get milk. Milk is a complementary good to cereal in this case. When demand for cereal increases, demand for milk also increases. All else being equal, the demand for a product increases when the price of its complement decreases. To take this back into the realm of software, consider why Sun Microsystems gave Java away for free. It wasn't because of the kindness of their hearts. Well, okay, it was Sun Microsystems, so maybe it was the kindness of their hearts. But it was also because once you write something in Java, you need some place to run it. In other words, the widespread adoption of Java increased their server sales. We did this with Docker in the early days. As makers of container Linux, we obviously benefited if people chose to use more containers. We continue to build out the container ecosystem with open source projects like our container runtime Rocket for this reason. We're doing this again right now with Kubernetes. Now we're going to examine a few ways to monetize open source. The classic open source software monetization model generally revolves around consulting and training. When Red Hat acquired VA Linux, this became one of their strategies, and they remain a notable leader in this space. Recalling that Peter Levine quote from earlier, this is a difficult model to use to grow a large business. Profit margins for ancillary services and support are much lower than for software product revenue, 20 to 30%, as opposed to 90%. Additionally, there are a lot of competing consulting agencies that you'll have to compete with. Cloudera is feeling this right now. They made Hadoop and other big data technology, but Hortonworks competes strongly on consulting, training support, and other ancillary services. The next model for open source companies involves offering indemnity. This means that as a business, you agree to provide software, and if something goes wrong, you're on the hook financially. You're acting as a kind of insurance for the client business. This is from the Cloudera Commercial Terms and Conditions. Cloudera, at its sole expense, will defend the customer against any claim and indemnify customer from and against any damages, settlements, liabilities, etc. This is a great business, but requires an appetite for risk. You can't be risk averse. And it tends to largely sell to very large players. You can also base your monetization strategy around creating a marketplace and then taking a percentage of the sales. A real-world example of this is Unity, which has a public marketplace for 3D assets that you can pull into your game. Something to be careful about when creating a marketplace is that it's really easy to create a walled garden, and you should try and avoid this. A walled garden means that you lock in content to your platform, and you take away control from the creators. Your creators made the content, and so they should own it. The final model that we will be discussing today is that of open core. This means that there's a commercial version of the open source software that includes additional features and plugins. This is a very common strategy in the database world, and actually nginx also does this with nginx+. Another thing to be cautious about with open core is that it's bad to be seen as feature limiting. As people, we're naturally loss averse. Being framed as feature limiting time, usage, seats, things like that, plays to our natural distaste for feeling like we're losing something that should be there. You need to ensure that your users feel like they're getting a free product that works and that they're buying an enterprise product where they're gaining something. At CoreOS, we currently incorporate several of these models. Our primary product is Tectonic, which is an open-core Kubernetes platform that also integrates other container technologies such as Container Linux, etcd, and Docker. We also offer consulting and training. Traditionally, open source software and accessibility have been at odds. It's not just deployment and setup. It's scaling, backups, failure recovery, and version updates. Every aspect should be as simple and easy to manage as services like RDS. And we're doing this in Tectonic with operators. Operators give the experience you expect from a cloud provider without the proprietary lock-in. We are taking upstream open source projects and making them ergonomic and easy to run in any environment. As we discover holes in the existing distributed systems ecosystem that need filled, we can create those open source projects and have it remain true to our business model. In this way, we are incentivized to make sure the open source solution is the best one out there. So in summary, despite the fact that it got off to a rocky start, the relationship between open source and enterprises is going strong. Open source development has become an integral business strategy, not because it gives companies access to a free labor pool or its ability to attract people because it doesn't require an exchange of money, but rather, open source development allows companies to create complementary goods, which drive up demand for their own products. There are a host of other viable business models with open source software at their core. At CoreOS, our business is to make the latest open source software easy to consume in any environment and automate the toil out of using it. Make it as easy to integrate into your infrastructure as possible and support you if any of it breaks. If you're excited about our mission, we would love to find a fit for you on our team. Check out our open positions at this link or email careers@coreos.com. Thank you.